the apocalypse. When an entire people are destroyed or destroy themselves. The end of civilization. For us today, as we go about our daily lives, it's barely something we consider. We're so sure it couldn't happen to us. But for some civilizations, it already has. The jungles of Southeast Asia, a place of myth and legend, of lost civilizations consumed by the rainforest. But one story continues to capture the world's imagination: the Khmer Empire.
From the early 9th century to the mid-15th century, the Khmer Empire commanded control over a huge swathe of Southeast Asia.
It was enormous. It covered Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, even up to Laos at its greatest extent. And the jewel in its crown was the city of Angkor.
At its height in the 1100s, it was more than 1,000 square kilometers in size.
The city held around 1 million people. That's bigger than the medieval European cities of London, Berlin, and Rome combined.
Great road networks link grand cities across the empire, with spectacular temples at their heart, capped in gold, like those of Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom. It's a civilization that thrives for over 500 years. But in 1327, all carved Khmer inscriptions at Angkor stop. The Royal Archives of Thailand recall that in 1431, the Thai army sack the great city. The Khmer Empire ceases to exist, and Angkor is left for the jungle. What could cause the greatest empire Southeast Asia has ever seen to fail so catastrophically?
In the middle of the 1800s, the French zoologist Henri Mouot travels to Southeast Asia and starts exploring the jungles. Mouot's fascination with Southeast Asia was fueled because he read the book The Kingdom and the People of Siam.
The book, published in 1857, gives a detailed account of the history, people, and culture of Siam, what is now modern-day Thailand. Its evocative descriptions of Southeast Asia sparks a drive in Mouot to explore the region.
With the backing of the Royal Geographical Society and the Zoological Society of London, Mouot goes to Siam, Laos, and Cambodia, collecting new botanical species.
But he doesn't just collect exotic plants. He comes across all these extraordinary ancient ruins, crumbling, hidden in the thick tropical jungle. But even that didn't prepare him for what he would discover in the forests of central Cambodia.
Hidden from view by thick rainforest is an immense complex of monuments, intricately carved statues and huge stone temples. The largest being Angkor Wat, which stands before Mouot and still stands today. But it's clear to Mouot that a great city also once stood in this section of jungle. A vast city that has since vanished. The city of Angkor.
Mouot is overwhelmed by what he's discovered at Angkor, and he writes in his diary, he says, "At the first view, one is filled with profound admiration and cannot but ask what has become of this powerful race, so civilized, so enlightened, the authors of these gigantic works."
When his engravings and journals are published, they create a sensation across the archaeological world. Muo dies of malaria in 1861, but his work inspires a generation of archaeologists to ask the question: who built this great stone city, and why had it been left to the jungle?
In the 1880s, the French linguist and archaeologist Etienne Ammonier picks up in Cambodia where Henri Muo left off. He's assigned the job of going across Cambodia and making a complete and comprehensive list of all the archaeological sites in the territory.
Angkor was a great city, built by a powerful ancient people. Were there more uncharted cities to uncover?
Ammonier travels through Thailand, Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam for 7 years, constantly chasing leads, tip-offs about where he might find more ruins, more temples, more stone cities. And he finds dozens of them.
Ammonier noticed that there were a lot of similarities between the architectural styles. So this suggests to him that there might be this link between Angkor and these other places across Southeast Asia.
What we're looking at here isn't just one lost city, it's an entire lost civilization.
They're dubbed the Angkorian, or Khmer Empire. But archaeologists have no idea when they existed and why they disappeared.
In 1883, Ammonier travels to a site in what is now present-day eastern Thailand to survey a temple known as Get.factual. Tom.
Could the ruins of this temple reveal any clues to help explain the disappearance of the Khmer Empire?
As the jungle is cleared, an enormous sandstone tablet is revealed, and it's got Sanskrit writing on it. Sanskrit is the ancient text that was used in the Hindu empires of the time, and it was widely used across the Khmer Empire.
In the 1st century CE, Indian merchants begin visiting the Mekong Delta to trade silk and luxury textiles, then settling through Southeast Asia in trading posts. But they import more than just goods. Hinduism begins to take hold here, until by the time of the Khmer Empire, it is the dominant religion of the region. The Khmer's great Hindu temples are modeled after the Indian Gupta architectural style, built from brick and stone. And Hinduism also brings with it the Sanskrit language.
Because Ammonier is a gifted linguist, he can read the Sanskrit inscriptions, and he's astounded because what it says is the list of kings of the Khmer Empire. It also has all the great events and moments, great wars, great changes, the foundings of cities. It's basically a history of the Khmer Empire.
Archaeologists can finally build a picture of who these people were and a timeline for when they existed.
In the 8th century, the area covering modern Cambodia is an absolute chaos. It's made up of small warring kingdoms that are all vying for control over the land.
From out of this chaos rises one warrior prince who manages to unify all these warring tribes and nation-states into one coherent Khmer Empire. This is the first king of the Khmer, Jayavarman II.
Jayavarman II comes to power in 802 CE. And for the Khmer people, he's much more than just a king.
He manages to convince everyone that not only is he a human king, he's actually a divine king, Chakravartin, the world ruler.
He is the manifestation of Shiva or Vishnu come to earth to rule over the people.
The Hindu religion tells how their gods live on Mount Meru, a mythical peak in the Himalayas, surrounded by the Sea of Creation. Of their gods, Shiva and Vishnu are the most powerful. And according to the Khmer people, it's their power that Jayavarman II embodies.
He has absolute authority over his empire. He's seen as a god.
Many of the Khmer's myths and legends are built around their kings, intertwined with the gods of the Hindu religion.
Jayavarman II is the first of these god kings, but successive kings also embody, uphold this idea that they too are divine rulers on earth.
Jayavarman II establishes his imperial capital at Hariharalaya. But in 893 CE, the seat of power moves northwest to Angkor proper.
For the next 600 years, this is going to be the seat of power for every king of the Khmer Empire.
And it's one they will fight over. In the early 12th century, a power struggle engulfs the Khmer Empire. Khmer myth tells how one of their great kings takes control.
Suryavarman II rose to power when the empire was at its height, but it was beginning to fray. You're beginning to see increased conflict. So Suryavarman II bounds off into battle to subjugate the rest of the kingdom.
Suryavarman II was such an amazing warrior that the legend lives on after his death. There are quotes about him saying that leaving on the field of combat the ocean of his enemies delivered a terrible battle. Bounding on the head of an elephant of the enemy king, he killed him as a Garuda, which is a bird creature from Hindu mythology, would kill a serpent.
In 1113, Suryavarman II is crowned king of the Khmer Empire and transforms the city of Angkor.
He commissions the construction of a new temple, one which will dwarf anything that's come before it, Angkor Wat.
Angkor Wat was the biggest temple built in the Khmer Empire and one of the largest religious monuments in the world to this day.
It is 4 times larger than the Vatican. Angkor Wat is built from over 10 million blocks. Some of these blocks are 1.5 tons.
It may have also been plated with gold.
But in 1177, not long after the temple's construction, the empire is again thrown into crisis.
The king, Suryavarman II, dies, and with his death comes a great period of chaos.
Ever since its founding, the Khmer Empire had embraced an expansionist military policy, waging battles against neighboring Thai warlords and the kingdom of Champa to take this land for themselves. Sensing unrest after Suryavarman II's death, Champa invade, striking deep into the heart of the Khmer Empire, laying siege to Angkor. But they don't anticipate the strength of the Khmer response. Their armies push Champa back, taking much of their land. And they don't stop here. At its height, the Khmer Empire stretches into modern-day Vietnam, Thailand, and Laos. It becomes a marvel of the ancient world. And Angkor itself doesn't stop growing. Their engineers build the spectacular royal palace of Angkor Thom. At its heart is the Bayon Temple. But who are the people who populate this magnificent city? The Bayon Temple offers archaeologists a glimpse.
All around the base of it are these 1,200 meters of beautiful carvings.
The carvings from the Bayon are really fascinating because while they do show us depictions of the king and his military conquests and battles, they also show us these depictions of the everyday lives of the people that would have lived in the city over 1,000 years ago.
You've got fishermen hauling in nets with the day's catch. You've got people cooking over open fires for hungry Angkorians. You've got people watching cockfighting as a bit of entertainment. In the reliefs, you always find depictions of elephants.
Elephants feature heavily in the life of Angkor, from beasts of burden to transport, and even elephant fights as a spectator sport.
You get a real sense of what it might have been like to walk down a street in part of Angkor at its height.
Ever present in the carvings are depictions of dancing. In the Hindu religion, apsaras are nymph-like celestial beings who would delight the gods of Mount Meru, the center of the Hindu universe, by dancing for them. In Angkor, the temples held large ballet troupes who would dance for the Khmer god kings. Throughout the city, religion dominates the monumental architecture, and not just the great temples. Massive reservoirs, known as barays, sit in the center of Angkor. The Western Baray is one of the largest man-made reservoirs in the world, measuring 8 kilometers long, 2 kilometers wide, and holding 53 million cubic meters of water. It is colossal on purpose. These reservoirs represent the sea of creation around Mount Meru. In Hinduism, water purifies the body and soul, and for the Khmer, bathing in water from these holy man-made seas is part of their religious rituals. Angkor is a thriving city, rich in culture and material wealth. But it doesn't last. After 1327, all Khmer stone inscriptions at Angkor stop. No further written records survive across the entire Khmer Empire.
The historical records we have are from the Thai Royal Archives, which tells us about the city being sacked and destroyed in 1431. After this point, the empire is abandoned. The cities are reclaimed by the jungle, and what had been one of the great civilizations of the ancient world disappears.
What could cause the fall of Angkor? And what happened to its people? For the first half of the 20th century, the focus for Khmer archaeologists is on documenting the great temples, artworks, and inscriptions that dot Cambodia.
But nobody was asking questions about, well, how did this civilization achieve the heights that it did? How did it operate on a day-to-day basis?
For French archaeologist Bernard-Philippe Grolier, understanding this could be key to uncovering the cause of its demise. In 1952, Grolier excavates at the royal palace of Angkor Thom, the last capital city of the Khmer Empire. He wants to build a record of Angkor's land use from the earliest occupation right up to the collapse. To do this, he'll turn to a pioneering science, archaeobotany, the study of ancient plants. Grolier combs each occupation layer, meticulously collecting samples of ancient pollen. By analyzing these, he hopes to uncover what plants were growing at what point in history.
What Grolier finds at the lowest level are wild plant species like ferns and trees.
And this suggests to him that this entire landscape before the Khmer arrived was a swamp. The city of Angkor was a marvel of the medieval world. You have to ask how a swamp, very poor farmland, could have supported the food supplies required to feed a city of this size.
Grolier goes on to examine pollen samples from the first layer of occupation, the birth of Angkor.
And he finds a drastic drop in the presence of the wild pollen species and a huge explosion in one particular pollen type, and that's rice.
and it remains constant through the entire lifespan of the city. And after it's abandoned, we start seeing the jungle species coming back into the pollen profile.
It's absolutely clear to Grolier that it's rice that fueled Angkor. But it really begs the question of how the quantities of rice needed to support such a massive population ever could have been cultivated on such poor quality farmland.
Could the appearance and disappearance of rice give a clue to the mysterious disappearance of the Khmer Empire? To answer this question, Grolier takes to the air.
Doing extensive archaeological surveys at Angkor, especially during the 1950s, was extremely difficult. There was a lot of dense vegetation, which made it very difficult to recognize archaeological features on the ground. So what Grolier did, it was really brilliant, actually. He took a completely different approach and decided to take an aerial perspective.
From above, the layout of the city and surrounding countryside becomes much clearer.
Grolier takes aerial photographs and finds over 600 sites, 3/4 of which were previously completely unknown.
The aerial photographs also give a clue about how the Khmer could produce enough rice to feed Angkor's massive population.
Grolier sees that the Khmer built rice paddy after rice paddy, divided by a raised system of dikes. And it stretched for kilometers.
They completely terraformed the landscape from jungle into rice paddies. The amount of manpower, of time, of labor that went into this was astounding.
But to grow rice, you need water, and a lot of it. How did the people of Angkor get enough to support so many rice farms? Grolier interrogates the aerial photographs further, and a pattern emerges. What looks like a system of human-made canals leading into the city.
Some look like they're redirecting rivers from the north of Angkor so that they flow into this system.
Grolier painstakingly maps the system.
This water network that he uncovers is nothing short of monumental. It's estimated that this is over 1,500 square kilometers of canals. That's over 6 times the size of New York City.
From the river, the canals deliver water to the barays, large raised reservoirs in the center of the city. According to Grolier, the barays aren't just spiritual. They hold a much more practical purpose. These barays act to regulate the flow of water from the annual monsoon rains, storing the water so that it can be used later in the dry season for farming.
Because the baray is lifted up, they're able to use natural gravity to distribute the water downhill into the rice paddies.
Across Angkor, there are multiple barays. It's clear to Grolier that more are built and the water network expanded as the city grew. Grolier coins Angkor the hydraulic city, a city that relies on liquid. In this case, water. The Khmer civilization is based on the control of water to grow rice. But what effect does this control of water and rice have on Khmer society? An ancient diary offers archaeologists a glimpse.
Zhou Deguan was a Chinese ambassador and trader who visited Angkor in 1296. His visit was special because he wrote a diary of what he saw and experienced during this year at Angkor.
His memoirs are one of the few surviving written accounts of life in the capital.
And he describes how important rice is to the Khmer people. It's not just a staple for their diets, it's also the basis upon which their whole economy is run.
Zhou Deguan writes that the land around Angkor is so fertile that farmers cultivate 3 to 4 crops of rice per year. There is such a great surplus that it's used as currency. And trade is largely the domain of women. Rice allows Angkor to grow as a city. But as it grows, it requires an army of administrators to manage it. Zhou Deguan describes many officials and junior officials below the king tasked with this responsibility. These roles are highly coveted and held by the elites of Angkor. They're integral to keeping its inhabitants, from god kings to peasants, alive.
As the city grew, more and more administrators were needed so that it functioned correctly. It was this network of canal infrastructure that had to be maintained and couldn't be afforded to break down.
If the water system breaks down, rice production, crucial to feed Angkor's population, but also the basis of their economy, would stop, and the city would fail. Is this a clue for the cause of the Khmer Empire's disappearance? At Angkor, Grolier excavates the remains of a canal. Can he find any evidence that the hydraulic city failed? As he digs down, he hits clay, the base of the waterway. Above this, though, he finds a huge layer of silt.
And for Grolier, this is proof that the network of canals are failing.
If the waterways are clogged with silt, then they would be unable to carry water, making them useless for rice production. Grolier believes that this silt comes from soil erosion caused by the Khmer cutting down the forests as they extend further into the jungle to build ever more rice paddies. For Grolier, this deforestation has the effect of taking away tree roots that kept soil in place. Now, this was being eroded by rain and running into the canals, clogging the water system to the point where it could no longer carry water. The Khmer solution is to dig more canals.
The water system at Angkor was already fiendishly complicated. Any sort of alteration to this system would have required administrators to oversee the planning and engineers as well to ensure that it did not break down again. But very quickly, this system grew out of control.
Grolier develops a theory that eventually the water system becomes so complicated, it overwhelms the engineers. It becomes impossible to keep the system clear of erosion, and water stops flowing to the rice paddies.
If the water system fails, the rice crop fails. If the rice crop fails, the population is facing starvation. And in that kind of a situation, it stands to reason that the people would leave.
The very engineering marvel that allows Angkor to grow so large leads to its downfall. For Grolier, he's convinced he's discovered what brought the great Khmer Empire to its knees. Intense and unsustainable agriculture caused the collapse of their irrigation network, leading to the ancient apocalypse of the Khmer people. But before Grolier can finish his investigation, the country is turned upside down.
In 1968, Cambodia is thrown into chaos. The Khmer Rouge are radical communists whose goal is to turn Cambodia into a classless society of peasant farmers. And they start a brutal civil war.
Grolier, despite the rising violence, tries to continue work at Angkor, but the violence overtakes the site. He is forced to leave.
Grolier escapes to France, but he's one of the lucky few. Soon the entire country is in Khmer Rouge hands. they oversee a reign of violence against the Cambodian people. An estimated 2 million people die under the murderous regime. A decade after the start of their insurgency, the Khmer Rouge are largely driven out of Cambodia by the Vietnamese army. But their legacy is brutal and long-lasting. To this day, landmines buried during the Civil War still dot the countryside.
It is decades before the landmines are cleared and archaeological work is allowed to continue at Angkor.
Grolier, though, will never see the Khmer capital again.
Grolier was a champion of Cambodian archaeology. He has spent his life dedicated to this project, and he never gets to return and see it fulfilled.
In May 1986, Grolier dies of a heart attack. A golden opportunity to uncover what happened to the Khmer Empire and its people dies with him. With Cambodia reeling from the legacy of the Khmer Rouge, the investigation turns to historical records for a cause of the Khmer Empire's demise. 14th century Chinese annals tell how, in 1331, 15 years before the Black Death hit Europe, bubonic plague rips through China. The Royal Thai Chronicles tell of another epidemic. Sometime between 1351 and 1369, a cholera outbreak devastates the population here, even killing princes of the royal family. The Khmer Empire had frequent contact with both the Chinese and the Thais. It's possible that they too faced an epidemic of either highly deadly diseases. But there are no records, either from inside or outside the Khmer Empire, describing mass infections. And no archaeological evidence has been discovered linking disease with the downfall of the Khmer. It seems that without a new approach to the history of the Khmer Empire, the true cause of their disappearance will remain lost beneath the jungle. In 2016, environmental geoscientist Dr. Daniel Penny searches for answers in sediment core samples drilled from the bottom of the moat surrounding Angkor Thom. Angkor Thom is the last royal residence of the city, home to the king and populated by the elite of Angkor and his entourage of administrators. It is the White House of the Khmer Empire and the last seat of power before the city is abandoned. By studying sediment core samples from here, he hopes to build a picture of life in the city, right at the end of its occupation. Material from Angkor Thom is blown into the surrounding moat and settles on its bed, building up in layers over time. Could the samples shed light on the cause of Angkor's collapse? Penny analyzes the sediment core samples for levels of dirt blown onto the moat from inside Angkor Thom.
Humans, when they go about their business, tend to disturb the soil, tend to dig it up. If we can measure the rate at which that material is accumulating, we have a pretty good proxy for the presence of people. And so what we find at Angkor Thom is a very clear indication of a decrease in the amount of soil making its way into these moats and reservoirs. It really starts to decrease quite dramatically in the first decades of the 1300s.
The drop in dirt levels kicked up from activity in and around the royal palace of Angkor Thom is evidence of fewer people living in the city. Dr. Penny analyzes the sediment core sample again, this time for the presence of pollen from aquatic plants. From the beginning of the 14th century, there is a steady increase in swamp vegetation. By the century's end, the moat around Angkor Thom, the center of power and home to Angkor's elites and administrators, becomes wild and overgrown. These administrators were crucial in organizing a workforce to maintain Angkor's unwieldy water network. If they were still living in the city, the moat around Angkor Thom would be clear of vegetation.
It's a very strong indication that the elite of Angkor were abandoning the city.
Angkor had thrived for hundreds of years. What was now causing its elite and administrators to leave the city? Archaeologists take to the skies in search of answers. Like Grolier over 60 years before, with aerial photography, they survey Angkor from above. But where his view was obstructed by the rainforest canopy, light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, offers modern archaeologists a revolutionary advantage.
The way that LiDAR works is that you fly a laser scanner over a site, and what we end up with is these incredible three-dimensional models of the bare surface of the Earth.
LiDAR exposes traces of human-made features, long hidden beneath Angkor's thick jungle canopy. Can it shed light on why the elites of Angkor abandoned the city?
Before the LiDAR acquisition, archaeologists had mapped 5,000 archaeological features in the greater Angkor region. With the LiDAR data, we were able to map an additional 20,000 archaeological features. So this just completely transformed our understanding of this site.
It was a real revelation to see roadways, occupation areas, and neighborhoods, and this incredibly intricate network of canals unfolding on the screen in front of us. LiDAR shows us that there was a system there that was large enough, that was extensive enough, that it could have been used in terms of rice irrigation.
Grolier's hydraulic city model proposed that a monumental irrigation network allowed the Khmer to cultivate great quantities of rice, fueling the city's growth as a medieval metropolis. The LiDAR scans give a clear picture of just how complex and interconnected this water system is, and an answer for why the elites of Angkor abandoned the city.
What you have to understand at Angkor is that towards the end of the Angkor period, this water management system had become incredibly complex.
Grolier hypothesized that Angkor was strangulated by its own infrastructure, that the system was so large and so deeply interdependent that it demonstrated a capacity for errors or faults to propagate outwards in a cascade. So even a small error somewhere in the network would create a system-wide shutdown or a blackout. If the water management system starts to break down, it's a huge problem.
Dr. Daniel Penny believes that the scale and complexity of Angkor's water network starts to overwhelm the Khmer elite and administrators. Angkor begins to break down as a functioning city. The elite appear to give up and leave, relocating south, closer to the Mekong and Tonle Sap rivers. But much worse is to come for Angkor. 700 kilometers east of the city, a clue is uncovered to the cause of its demise.
In the highland rainforests in Vietnam, in the Badup Nui Ba National Park, a tree ring scientist called Brendan Buckley drilled tree ring samples from cypress trees.
By analyzing tree rings in the core samples, it's possible to build a picture of the climate of ancient Southeast Asia, stretching back to the Angkor period. Could they reveal a cause for Angkor's demise?
In years of heavy rainfall, the annual growth ring of a tree tends to be fairly large, and in years of low rainfall, the growth ring inside of a tree is relatively modest in size.
As the tree rings are examined, it becomes very clear that around the 1330s, there's a period of about 30 very small tree rings, which represent some kind of 3-decade mega drought.
And the region isn't hit just once. From the 1400s to the 1420s, shorter but much more severe droughts strike.
Everything at Angkor is about water. It's an extreme problem for the people living there.
This would have completely undermined their ability to grow rice. People would have been facing starvation.
If the Khmer people were starving, it could very well explain why the empire dissolved and Angkor abandoned.
And the last known inscription from Angkor dates to 1327, which corresponds pretty closely to the evidence that we have for this mega drought event, which commences in the 1330s.
At this time in history, great climatic changes are impacting civilizations across the globe. Europe transitions from the medieval warm period to freezing conditions known as the Little Ice Age. It is disastrous for settlements across Europe, with thousands being abandoned. The heyday of the High Middle Ages here comes to a halt. In Southeast Asia, the climatic pattern flips to mega drought. But in Angkor, archaeological evidence shows that the people here adapted. With the administrators and water engineers abandoning the city, local communities make their own modifications to the water network to collect as much rainwater as possible.
You have communities gathering together to modify the water management infrastructure.
The people of Angkor redirected and even dug new canals to stave off the effects of mega drought.
For a society that's really based on agricultural production of rice, to have no water is an absolutely catastrophic outcome. And so you have to make whatever changes you can in order to get water in and out of your fields.
By modifying their water network, the remaining population of Angkor survive the mega drought. But a different change in climate would prove catastrophic for the city. In the east of Angkor, flowing through the city, is a canal that stands out compared to all others in the 1,500 square kilometer water network. It's the main arterial canal that would have carried rainwater from the Khulen Mountains in the northeast deep into the center of Angkor. Water still flows through the canal today, but there's one thing about it that is deeply confusing to archaeologists. The canal is 8 meters deep. The average depth of a canal here is 1 to 2 meters. This canal is more than 4 times deeper than any other across the region.
This canal is much lower than the level of the rice paddies that it would have to flow to actually irrigate them, and water does not flow uphill.
There seems to be no obvious reason why the Khmer would dig a canal that's 8 meters deep, as it couldn't work as a way of carrying water to their rice paddies. Any water in it would be stuck with no way out. Which raises the question, why is it so deep? The tree ring core samples drilled in Vietnam offer a possible answer.
The Vietnamese tree ring data are very clear that there are 2 episodes of very prolonged drought in the middle of the 14th and the early part of the 15th centuries. What they also show is sandwiched between those 2 droughts is a period where you have some of the wettest years of the past 700 years.
Not only was the region hit by mega droughts, it also then faced incredibly heavy, disruptive forces of monsoon rain.
After being hit by mega droughts, the Khmer people are then hit by a mega monsoon. Any vast injection of water from a mega monsoon would be disastrous for Angkor's water network. The Khmer had designed the city's urban complex to collect and store water from yearly monsoon rains, but nothing could prepare them for a mega monsoon. Once it hits, Angkor takes on more water than the city can handle. Even worse, the canal feeding water from the northeast is dug in a straight line. With no bends to slow it down, it has the effect of shooting a huge volume of water at high speed towards the center of the city.
The force of this volume of water gouges the bottom of the canal out to a depth of 8 meters and pushed, along with the volume of water, a huge volume of mud and debris. And that mud and debris had to go somewhere.
This sediment, gouged out by the flood, is washed down into Angkor's central and southern water network, clogging the system.
Grolier was, in fact, correct. Soil erosion had caused the downfall of this immense interconnected water system. But it wasn't soil erosion due to deforestation, but rather huge volumes of water introduced by this mega monsoon cycle.
Angkor's interconnected and highly sophisticated water network would never recover. Repairing it would be a gargantuan task. And with the city's administrators and water engineers gone, there is no one left to organize or direct a workforce to do this. Angkor can no longer sustain itself as the great capital it was. And without the highly complex and functioning water system that sustained its once huge population, the capital city becomes a shadow of its former self. Stripped of its great capital Angkor, and devastated by mega droughts and mega monsoons, the Khmer Empire is critically weakened. The kingdom of Ayutthaya and Lan San, modern-day Thailand and Laos, take advantage of the failing empire and rise up, taking back much of what was once their land through military conquest. The Khmer Empire ceases to exist. Very little is known about what comes next, but the Royal Chronicles of Siam tell how the Siamese army sack Angkor in 1431. By 1434, a new capital is created at Phnom Penh, now the modern capital of Cambodia. But although Angkor is left for the jungle, it's never completely forgotten. The Khmer people largely convert from Hinduism to Buddhism. Today, approximately 93% of the Cambodian population are Buddhist. Angkor Wat remains a Buddhist site of worship and pilgrimage, long after Angkor is abandoned. And the Khmer people themselves aren't gone.
The people who live in and around the temples today are the ancestors of the people who built Angkor.
The Khmer people never left. They're still in Cambodia. They're still living in this area that we call the Greater Angkor region, farming the fields much like their ancestors did hundreds of years ago.
But never again would the Khmer construct such imposing cities or elaborate temples as the jewel in the empire's crown, Angkor.